Today, we are diving into something absolutely massive. We're talking about India's gigantic system to make sure its billion-plus people have enough to eat. It is one of the biggest, most complex undertakings on the entire planet. So let's get into how it all works. It really all boils down to this one huge question. You see, it's not just about planting seeds and harvesting crops, not even close. It's about engineering a system so enormous, so intricate, that it can handle pretty much anything thrown at it. Natural disasters, crazy market swings, you name it, and still reach every single corner of a subcontinent. So how on earth do you even do that? Okay, so when we talk about food security, there's an official definition, and it stands on three legs, like a stool. First is availability. Is there actually enough food in the country to go around? Second, accessibility. Can people physically get their hands on it? And third, affordability. Can they actually afford to buy it? If even one of those legs gets wobbly, the whole thing could come crashing down. Now, to really get why this system is so incredibly important, we need to take a look back in time to a moment when it all went horribly wrong. The stakes really couldn't be higher, and the lessons that were learned came at the cost of an immense tragedy. 3 million. That's the estimated number of people who died during the Bengal famine of 1943. Just let that number sink in. This was so much more than a food shortage. It was a total breakdown of the system, a catastrophe that burned itself into the nation's collective memory and became the single biggest reason for creating the food policies that exist today. And here's what that really means. A famine isn't just about feeling hungry. It's a domino effect of disasters. It's a public health crisis spiraling out of control. And preventing this exact nightmare scenario is the entire reason India's food safety net was built in the first place. So how did India actually go about building this safety net? Well, the modern system we see today, which has been tweaked and developed over decades, really stands on two main pillars that have to work together perfectly. Let's break them down. The logic here is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Step 1, the government builds up a massive strategic stockpile of food. Step 2, it creates a nationwide network to get that food out to the public at prices they can afford. So that first pillar is called the buffer stock. You can think of it like the country's national savings account, but for grain. The Food Corporation of India, or the FCI, is the government body that goes out and buys up huge amounts of wheat and rice from farmers, then stores it all in warehouses across the country. This way, even if there's a bad monsoon or a poor harvest, there's always a backup. And you might be asking, how does the FCI get all that grain? Well, the key tool here is something called the minimum support price, or MSP. Before farmers even plant a single seed, the government announces, hey, we guarantee we will buy your crop for this price. This takes a huge amount of risk off the farmer's shoulders and encourages them to grow the staple foods the country needs most. All right, on to the second pillar, the public distribution system, or PDS. This is the delivery service. It's a massive network. We're talking over 500,000 little government-run shops called Fair Price shops that sell the grain from that buffer stock directly to families at super low subsidized prices. This is what makes sure the food is both accessible and affordable. For a long, long time, this whole system was basically seen as a welfare program. But then, in 2013, everything changed. A new law was passed that completely flipped the script on how the entire country thought about food. And the shift was, well, profound. The National Food Security Act, the NFSA, turned food from something the government gave you into something you had a legal right to. Suddenly, getting subsidized food wasn't charity. It was a legal entitlement for a massive chunk of the population. The scale here is just, it's hard to wrap your head around. The NFSA covers about 800 million people. That makes it by far the largest food safety net of its kind anywhere in the world. So who exactly gets covered? Well, the law is pretty specific. It covers up to 75% of everyone living in rural areas and up to 50% of the urban population. When you do the math, that comes out to about 2/3 of the entire Indian population having a legal right to subsidized food. Now, under this law, people are sorted into two main categories. You have the Antyodaya Anna Yojana, or AAY, which is for the poorest of the poor. They're entitled to a flat 35 kilograms of grain per family every month. Then there's the much larger group, the priority households, who get 5 kilograms of grain per person. Okay, so a system this big, this ambitious, it's not going to be perfect, right? Of course not. For all its successes, India's food security system is facing some really serious challenges and criticisms that we just can't ignore.
Let's run through some of the big ones. First off, it's incredibly expensive to maintain these giant buffer stocks, sometimes holding way more grain than is actually needed. Then there's the heartbreaking issue of wastage, grain just rotting in storage because of bad infrastructure. There's also a big problem with what's called leakage, which is when grain gets stolen and illegally sold on the open market instead of going to the people who need it. And maybe the most worrying problem for the future is the environmental one. The MSP system pushes farmers to grow a ton of rice and wheat, which are super thirsty crops. This is draining groundwater supplies at an alarming rate, and nobody's quite sure how sustainable that is.
So, all these challenges have got people thinking, maybe there are other ways to do this outside of the giant government machine. And some really interesting local grassroots models have started popping up, showing a different way forward.
A great example is what the Academy of Development Science has been doing in Maharashtra. They've helped communities set up their own grain banks. The idea is brilliant in its simplicity. People in the village can borrow grain when times are tough, like before a harvest, and then pay it back with a little bit of interest after they've harvested their own crops. It builds local resilience, and it's been a huge success. So far, we've been really zoomed in on India's own system. But, no country exists in a vacuum. There are huge global forces at play that are adding a whole new level of pressure and complexity to this challenge. The World Bank keeps a close eye on these global trends. And yeah, their latest reports are painting a pretty worrying picture about what's happening with food prices around the world. And when you look at the data, it's pretty stark. What it shows is that in a lot of developing countries, the price of food is climbing way faster than everything else. That means that the affordability pillar of food security is getting weaker and weaker, putting a massive squeeze on families everywhere. And what all this really means is that we're in a new reality. We've got wild swings in global food prices, totally unpredictable weather because of climate change, and shifting trade roles. All of these things are creating new problems for even the strongest national systems, and that includes India's. Which brings us right to our final big question. This entire system was designed with the ghosts of the past in mind to prevent another catastrophe. But is it ready for the challenges of the future? Because as these global pressures keep building, how this critical safety net adapts and evolves will literally determine the health and well-being of hundreds of millions of people for generations to come.